PlayStation.
Welcome to the Know. I'm Master Jenkins.
And I'm Gus Sorola.
There's been a lot of speculation about both PS4 Neo and Xbox Scorpio, but one industry insider says that Sony's new system exists because PlayStation VR is, quote, awful on the regular old PS4.
And that's a bit troubling for, the 40 million of us out there who already have one of those.
Yeah, this information comes from Edge magazine in their newest issue, 294, which features real news about The Last Guardian. Yay! There are also comments about why PS4 Neo was created, and it's not too pretty for PlayStation VR enthusiasts who are not planning on upgrading.
The quote was made by an anonymous industry insider who happens to be the chief technology officer at a video game-related company.
So we've got an anonymously made quote, which often brings about skepticism, but made by AC-level executives, so it's somebody who knows some things.
The CTO said PSVR was going to be terrible on a launch PS4. It was going to be truly awful.
Wow,
Ugh.
tell us how you really feel,
Yikes.
Mr. Anonymous. He went on to say, something a bit more powerful starts to bring VR into range. If you want to deal with crazy requirements for performance in VR, you absolutely have to do this.
They actually have another source who didn't quite confirm the information, but did make some similar claims.
Edge also spoke to a lead games designer from a European studio who said that nobody was asking Sony for more power for their games. Well, nobody except for VR developers, stating that those are weighted more heavily at the moment for Sony.
This source later added, VR is the most exciting development in the industry right now, and if it's here to stay, then there will be a lot of demand for more powerful hardware.
Now, when you consider the recommended specs for viable VR from every other headset manufacturer out there, none of this sounds too far out of left field.
Both the Vive and the Rift have pretty similar requirements when it comes to VR games, a graphics card equivalent to a GTX 970, and a processor equivalent to an Intel i5 4590. Those, of course, clearly outmatch what's going on with the PS4.
So we covered this yesterday in our story about Xbox Scorpio, which as a name I'm actually coming around on, aside from the horoscope implications. But given the leaked specs and other insider information, Polygon sources for that story speculate that Sony is targeting 4.1 teraflops for the PS4 Neo, putting it conveniently right in line or just above the recommended performance threshold that comes with the GTX 970 for PC.
If true, this is certainly a troubling development for anybody who's hoping to shell out $400 for a PSVR this fall. But for many, performance was already a concern given the strict requirements laid out everywhere else in the industry.
Yeah, it's a little bit complicated, but PC hardware site Logical Increments has a great breakdown of how tough it is to handle VR. This is mostly due to the fact that each eye requires a separate 1080 display running at 90 frames per second.
Since our eyes don't see the same image twice, but rather two images from different points of view, VR has to do the same thing to accommodate. Meaning VR headsets don't simply double an image, they have to render two slightly different separate images.
This is called stereo rendering.
Stereo rendering.
It's like for your eyes what your ears have been doing, and makes VR extremely intensive. In short, VR gaming has roughly 90% the pixel demand of gaming at 4K resolution, which is 3840 by 2160 at 60 Hz.
From an outside perspective, it at least seems that Sony has already made a few concessions to try to mitigate this for PlayStation VR on launch consoles.
For starters, the PSVR headset has a display of 960 by 1080 per eye, adding up to a single 1080 display, whereas both Rift and Vive total 2160 by 1200 across both eyes.
There's also the external processing unit. Supposedly it's just for the social second screen experience whereby your friends can watch, you make an ass out of yourself while playing 100-foot robot golf.
But it may also be dabbling in a little bit of crucial processing on the side. There's not much in the way to know until someone gets their hands on it to peek under the hood, though.
Now, there's always the chance this whole comment is totally overblown. These could be comments made based on an early version the CTO saw of PlayStation VR rather than more recent outings.
Now, we know there are plenty of Sony haters out there that wouldn't put anything past the company, but there's no way that Sony allows something like PlayStation VR to come in a janky, unplayable format.
Previously, Sony had said it wouldn't greenlight any PlayStation VR games that weren't running at least at 60 frames a second. The more likely scenario is that developers have had to significantly downgrade the fidelity of their games in order to make them hit Sony's requirements for frame rate and latency.
So I wonder if that means 60 frames per second on the original PS4 or on PS4 Neo. So it doesn't mean you need a PS4 Neo to enjoy PlayStation VR games, just that on the launch PS4 systems, PSVR games probably won't look much like PS4 games, which we already kind of assumed would be the case, but these comments are a little more troublesome.
One of the big points we got from the leaked information from PS4 Neo, Sony wants to be certain that there are no Neo exclusives, and that would include PlayStation VR titles. It's also important to note that the leaks about PlayStation 4 Neo included no mention of PlayStation VR in general.
Now, something else to keep in mind with all these comments is that plenty of people have had hands-on experience with PlayStation VR at a number of tech shows and industry events, and we haven't really seen any complaints from those.
However, the other thing to consider is that most of the games that exist for PlayStation VR right now are extremely simple. They're not exactly, ambitious in scope and visual fidelity.
But I want to be a dolphin that goes to school. That was always my favorite VR demo. I know it's not for PSVR, but it was one of my favorites. So it could be true that to move beyond that, developers need more power. Right now, Sony doesn't want any Neo exclusives, but that could be something that changes over time if VR developers are getting their way as much as these sources claim.
Many have already happily handed Sony the VR throne given their headset's price compared to the competition, plus the penetration of PlayStation 4s already in the wild.
Just penetration in general.
Yeah, assuming that they can play VR, that is.
We'll just have to see how well it all plays out for ourselves when PSVR hits the market in October. It's actually coming up pretty quick. October seems like it's a long ways away, but it's not.
It's soon. So what do you guys think about these comments about PlayStation VR performance on the regular old PS4? Let us know in the comments.
And for more VR news, like this video and subscribe to the Now. Now, we covered this yesterday with our story about Xbox.
It's also important to note that the leaks about PS4 the Nordic version. You should do like a 4.1 teraflops, like a
I'll tear your flops.
like a monster truck rally. Ew.